Story time about how my crazy neighbors ate my dog. By the way, this is an anonymous story from a follower. So me and my boyfriend had just bought our first house together. Everyone welcomed us to the new neighborhood, but we didn't have neighbors to the right side of us yet. No one was in the house yet. So about 6 months into us living there, we get our brand new neighbors. So obviously, since we've been there for 6 months, we introduced ourselves to them. So our neighbors were these two grown men. They didn't even have any furniture in their house, so that kind of stood out. We thought later they'd get moving trucks and move in some furniture, but they never did. So me and my boyfriend had a Pomeranian named Chippy. Sometimes we would let our dog go outside to use the restroom, and every time I went outside to get the dog, I noticed our neighbors were just staring at me. So one day I let Chippy go outside to use the restroom, and when I was ready to bring him back in, I couldn't find him anywhere. So I'm looking around, I'm literally looking everywhere, and he is nowhere to be found. So I go back into the house to tell my boyfriend, and then a few minutes later we get a knock on the door. And it's both of our neighbors like, "Hey, we found your dog in your front yard." Like for part 2. Part 2 story time about how my crazy neighbors ate my dog. By the way, this is an anonymous story. So after our neighbors bring by our dog, we started to get suspicious for sure. Things just weren't adding up at all. So one day a kid across the street saw our dog Chippy and wanted to play with him. So I said, "Of course, only if you make sure nothing happens." Obviously, I didn't think anything would happen. That kid loved our dog. So as the kid is playing with our dog Chippy, the neighbors are looking out of the window watching him. So they come outside of their house and they go, "Hey, can I play with him?" And the boy says, "Yeah, but you can't let anything happen to him." Then our neighbor goes, "Oh, of course not. I play with Chippy all the time." The boy then goes, "Okay, well I have to go home now. Make sure Chippy gets back to his owner." He says, "Of course, nothing's going to happen to Chippy." So the boy goes back into his house, and our neighbors bring Chippy inside of their house. So after about an hour or so, I go outside to see what's going on. Chippy is missing yet again. Like for part 3. Part 3 story time about how my neighbors ate my dog. So once I go outside to look for my dog, I notice he's not there and neither was the kid. So I go to the kid's house across the street to see if maybe he brought the dog home. Then he says, "No, I gave him to your neighbors. He said he'd give him back to you." My stomach dropped because I do not trust my neighbors. So I go to my neighbor's house and I'm banging on the door and they don't answer. So I go get my boyfriend. Then he comes out and he's banging on the door demanding that they come out. They never answered. So we call the police. Once the police are called, they get there and they bang on the door and then they answer. The police noticed that they had no furniture and the lights were off, so they became suspicious. A second police officer pulls up and he claims that he recognizes them. And he tells me that they're two homeless men. They don't even actually live there. They broke in. As they were looking around in the house, they found Chippy's collar and they also found remains of a dog. Meaning they ate our dog. That explains why they kept watching him. They were arrested on many charges.
Story time about how my blind date hid in my closet for 8 hours. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I'm in my late 20s and I've been looking for a boyfriend for years now. I started using dating apps, but none of that worked. Recently, my boyfriend started dating this really cool guy. He told me he had a really good friend and that he thought they should set me up. Of course, I had never met this guy before. I didn't know if he had social media. I didn't know anything about him. My sister and her boyfriend set up the whole thing. Oh yeah, and my sister told me that he was a doctor, he owned a boat, and loved golfing. So I got ready for the date and I showed up to the restaurant. Right away he comes over and says hi to me. He knew that I would be wearing a pink shirt. We sat down to eat and we basically stayed at the restaurant for 3 hours just talking and having fun. We talked about a bunch of stuff and towards the end of the date, he gave me a kiss and asked me out again. I said yes. We said goodbye and I went home. Then I decided to go get ice cream and I went back home. I watched some TV, went to sleep. The next morning, I'm getting ready. I open my closet door and he jumps out. Part 2. This guy had been hiding in my closet for 8 hours watching me sleep and change. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Ran into my living room and I asked him what he was doing. He said that he really liked me and that he just wanted to spend some time with me and he didn't know how to tell me, so he decided to come over to my place when I went to the supermarket the night before. I asked him how he got in and he said he came in through a window. I looked at my window and it was wide open. Remember I said I went to the supermarket in part 1? That's when he decided to come into my apartment. By the way, at this point I had just finished showering and I was in my towel. My knees started shaking and I was so scared. I asked him why he hid in my closet for 8 hours. He said it wasn't a big deal and that he thought I wouldn't see him. Then he actually said that he was excited for our second date. He started walking toward me and I told him to stay away. But then he started getting really angry. So I decided to play it off and act like everything was cool just so that I could get out of my apartment safely. I stayed with him in my apartment for 2 hours. Then I pretended I wanted to go get breakfast together. But then he lunged at me and tried to kiss me. Part 3 is He lunges at me and tries to kiss me. I pushed him away, but then he tried again. I ran to the door, unlocked it, and ran to my neighbor's house. I could feel him right behind me the whole time. He was asking me to calm down while I was running away. Did he actually think I was going to be flattered that he was hiding in my closet for 8 hours while I slept? Luckily, my neighbor opened the door right away. He let me in, but my blind date tried to pretend that we were together and that we had just gotten into a fight. My neighbor knew better because he knew my situation. He locked the door and then we called the cops. It turns out he went to the same gym I did. My sister's boyfriend goes to the same gym. So he asked my sister's boyfriend to set us up, even though they actually didn't know each other. The cops looked for him but couldn't find him. I haven't seen him since.
Story time. My parents found out that I was dating a white boy. So a little background information. My parents are super strict, especially my dad. And on top of that, my dad thought that races should not mix. One of his sayings was, "You don't see a blue jay fucking a pigeon." AKA, white people and black people should not be together. Sounds fucking stupid. Yeah, I know. Anyways, like I was saying, it was my freshman year of high school and I had been dating this boy for 2 months. And of course he was white. And we had to keep it super low key because if any of my friends found out about it, they would have fucking told my dad. Now when I look back at it, those weren't good friends at all. Anyways, every Friday, my boyfriend and I would go to the movies. And we would go to this theater that was 45 minutes away because nobody that I knew would be there. The only person that knew that I was dating a white boy was my sister. Well, the one day after the movies, I couldn't get a ride home, so I had to get a ride home with him and his family. And as soon as I pulled up, my parents were waiting outside, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my parents found out that I was dating a white boy. So like I said, my sister couldn't come pick me up, so I had to get a ride with him and his family. And what do you know, as soon as we pull up to my fucking house, my dad is standing on the porch waiting for me. So I told his parents to drive around the block one more time while I called my sister and told her to distract my dad. So as we're driving up to my house again, I see that my dad isn't on the porch. So I run into the house before he could see me getting out of a white boy's car. So a few months go by and we're still dating, very low key. And the one night at 3 a.m, I get woken up by my sister. And she says, "You better delete any pictures that you have of you and you know who off your phone. And you better come up with the story right now. Because one of your friends took pictures of you walking with him in the hallways and kissing him behind the stairwell at school." So after I deleted everything off my phone, a few seconds later, my dad came into my room screaming his head off. He was so mad. I ended up getting my ass beat. And I also got grounded from my phone for 4 months. But after that, my mom ended up leaving my dad. And then him and I got back together. Crazy ass story time about how I almost got away with sneaking out. A little background information. It was the summer of my sophomore year in high school. And my parents are super strict. Like, they had a tracker on my phone, they had a tracker in my car, they have cameras all over my house, and my curfew was 7:30 even on weekends. Well, this boy that I really liked was throwing this party, and I begged my parents to go, and of course they said no. So my friends and I came up with this elaborate plan on how I was going to sneak out of my house and go to this party. Well, one of my friend's brothers had his license. So at 11 o'clock, after everybody fell asleep, they parked in my neighbor's driveway. Before everybody fell asleep, I made sure to put my ladder up to my window from my bathroom. And because it was in the back of the house, there were really no cameras around there. Well, skip ahead, I couldn't get down the ladder. So my friend's brother had to come around and try to move the ladder. But I was still too scared to go down the ladder by myself. So her brother crawled up the ladder. And once he was on the roof, he tried to help me get down. Well, then he fell like for part 2. Part 2 about how I almost got away with sneaking out. So like I said, he fell off the roof. Let me elaborate on that. So while I was going down the ladder, my foot slipped. So he grabbed a hold of my hand and I started falling along with the ladder. So then he grabbed a hold of the ladder, tried to pull it back, but when he did that, he flipped over the ladder. Well, he fell through this glass table that was on the deck that was around my pool, and everybody in my house woke up. My dad came running outside. Oh, and her brother wasn't moving after that. So my dad called an ambulance, and my friend who was with her brother had to call her parents. And pretty much after that, I got grounded for a full year. I didn't have a phone or anything. They took my car away. They also drilled my windows shut. My friend didn't get grounded because her parents knew that she was going to this party. Oh, and her brother was in a coma for 3 months.